it's something to watch out for. If you're a leader and you're not getting that type of feedback, and you're not hearing from others the candid feedback, there is a problem.
The more dispassionately they can do that work, in other words, the ease with which they can make what somebody who's highly empathetic would struggle with, the higher they're going to climb in an organization. They look like heroes when they can lay off 1,000 people and not even lose a single night's sleep.
And we attribute the success of the company to typically the 50-year-old plus white male who conforms to a specific style of leadership that we think is a really good thing.
Right. The argument I'm making is that employees are a very important part of the bottom line. Right. If I can either have employees that just check the box every day, clock out at 5 o'clock and just do their job and leave, or I can have employees who are so connected with the vision of the company, feel so valued by the company that they're literally trying to solve problems for the company in the shower.
All right, I'm joined today by Sean Lemson. He's author of the new book, One Drop of Poison, How One Bad Leader Can Slowly Kill Your Company. Welcome to the podcast, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I want to start with a statistic. So in the book, you cite research that suggests that 8 to 12% of executives would fit into a description of psychopath or sociopath. Now, companies don't have sociopath quotas that I'm aware of. They're trying to fill. So there's obviously something going on here when you've got like a 1, 2, 3, 4% of the general population that fits into that category, and yet more of them are getting into leadership positions inside companies. So what do you think is going on there?
Well, I mean, just to put it frankly, I think that the incentives and the work that these leaders have to do, the more dispassionately they can do that work, in other words, the ease with which they can make what somebody who's highly empathetic would struggle with, the higher they're going to climb in an organization. They look like heroes when they can lay off 1,000 people and not even lose a single night's sleep, and for a sociopath, that is something that is just like choosing which brand of bread to buy. I mean, they just are incapable of empathy. That's what makes them that way. And so they get rewarded for that, what others see as bravery in the face of a difficult decision. And so they get moved up in organizations. Now they're not very successful leaders once they get to the top, because they're always self-serving, right? Even along the way up, they're self-serving. So that becomes a lot more obvious when they're standing at the top than when they were on their way up. So typically it's not quite, they're not quite successful at senior leadership positions as they think they are.
So tell me about Barbara.
Barbara. So I would say Barbara was a kind of leader who I like to say she led with exclamation points and not question marks. She was very much in the, from the first moment I met her, she was telling me what she was expecting from me, from what she was expecting from us. And it set us off a little weird because, we also had experience. We also had we were trying to help her get her feet, grounded at the company. She had just joined, and boy, she came out of the gate with a lot of exclamation points, as I would say, not question marks. And so that right out of the gate, that's it felt like she had to prove something rather than learn something. Which was I think started off on the wrong foot, and I think everybody had that. And I think she began making some changes to the organization that the people in the organization didn't agree with. And I mean, this is an important point to make here. Leaders' job is obviously sometimes to take an organization to a place that's different than where they are, but they shouldn't do that through commandment and policy. they should do that through winning hearts and minds, right? If they truly believe where they want to take everybody, then they should have people following them to that place, not being commanded to that new place. And Barbara had a real commanding way of making these changes, and engagement went down the tubes. I mean, for 3 years, I think the organization of 160 people, the engagement scores were just completely tanked, and people were leaving the organization. So it wasn't a good thing. And now Barbara was one of the archetypes that I use called the peacock, and I use that archetype because the peacock is someone who's very upwardly focused. They spend a lot of time strutting their stuff and spreading their feathers out for their leadership team at the expense of their own teams, the teams they're leading. And in fact, it wasn't, it's not uncommon for a peacock to completely ignore their teams altogether or throw them under the bus if necessary to make sure that they look good to their leaders. So, my own personal experience with Barbara was just indicative. This kind of thing happened to all of us in our own way, but I had made a huge transformation for a large team at the company that was about 20 people. When I started with that team, most of the team wanted to quit. The leaders were frustrated on the team. They didn't know what to do about it. And their flow of the work was bad. The quality was bad. So I really spent a lot of time with this team as a coach, working with each individual, improving communication. We split the team into 3 squads, all pulling from the same backlog, really some innovative things. And at the end of a couple months, people were completely enamored with their new formation. Nobody wanted to quit. The quality was up. The leaders were happy. I was getting letters of recommendation from them to my boss. So things were really looking great. And so when Barbara approached my boss and asked for a wins, my boss suggested that I use this as a win. And so I gave this whole use case with all of the wins that we had accomplished with this team. And Barbara just said to me, I want 3 hard numbers. I need numbers, Sean. And I said, what numbers do you want? Well, I need to know, like, what's the percent? Did their cycle time go down? She just started touting these metrics. She wanted hard numbers. And I said, look, this is a new team now at this point. They were broken up into 3 new teams. There's no baseline I can compare this to. So I can't really tell you what improvement was. All I can tell you is that nobody wants to quit now, and the leaders are happy with me, and the quality is up. So, those are some wins. And she kicked my win out of the deck because I didn't have these 3 hard numbers. And I think the message that sent to me was that what I thought I brought as value wasn't valuable to her. And she never brought my win above her. So nobody above her ever heard about any of the work that I did. And I just want to stress that thing she did to me was the same thing she did to almost everybody in her organization in some way. There were a lot of people who were struggling to figure out what value they added in face of her shutting them down. So peacocks are one of my least favorite, and unfortunately, they're probably one of the most prevalent archetypes.
Yeah. If I were interviewing Barbara right now instead of interviewing you, my guess is she probably wouldn't view her tenure in the same way that you did or your colleagues did or anything along those lines, right? And that gets me to actually one of the more beautifully simple definitions that you have of what a leader is. I wonder if you could share that with us.
Yeah, so I have a little trick question that I give people when I'm working with them, leaders that I'm working with. I'll say to them, what's the one thing all leaders have? And I wait for the answer, and they usually come back with, courage or vision or, all the answers you can imagine that people say that a good leader has. And I said, well, it's actually followers. That's it. That's what all good leaders have, is followers. And there are people who don't even have direct reports who are seen as leaders. And conversely, there are people who have a lot of direct reports, and none of those direct reports actually view that person as a leader. So leadership has more to do with you having people who want to follow you. So Importantly, though, when I talk about toxic leadership, and to your point about
Mm-hmm.
if you were interviewing Barbara, you know, most people who are toxic leaders don't wake up every day thinking, I'm going to destroy my teams today. They're not thinking, how
No.
can I get this? What they're doing is they're operating with a leadership mindset, which we can talk about later.
Okay.
Um, that and a set of goals that the company has created for them, and incentives, their own motivations, and they're just using the way that mindset they have about leadership to try to achieve those goals. And that's what Barbara would say. Barbara would say, I had goals that were given to me that I had to achieve, and so I did my own style to get that done. And I would argue that maybe there was nothing wrong with those goals, or even where she wanted to take the organization. What was wrong was that she just assumed she could command us all there,
Yeah.
instead of getting us to want to follow her there. Right. And
Yeah.
and by the way, it is a possibility that she's wrong also. Right. And an open-minded leader would say, oh, I have all these people working for me and they're all subject matter experts, and most of them hate this plan. So
Yeah.
this is an idea, at least stop and think, if I have all these people working for me who really know what they're talking about and they hate this plan, maybe there's something wrong with my plan. Maybe, just open the idea to think that there might be something wrong with your plan. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many threads we could pull on there. One that I think really comes through quite well in the book is this idea that these things can almost kind of like spread inside organizations. So
Mm.
obviously, I don't know Barbara, but my guess is that it isn't that Barbara didn't have any followers. She probably had some followers. Now, whether they wanted to follow her, like emotionally wanted to follow her, is another thing. But she almost certainly probably had some followers who were emulating her, as in
Other
they
peacocks.
saw they saw the peacock. They go, "That's a behavior. I understand. I'll be a peacock inside this organization, and I will emulate
Correct.
that." And that
Yes.
is fascinating because it spreads through organizations. We've seen this in a lot of our work, whereby you'll have. It's really fascinating the way in which leaders role model behaviors through their organization, and they role model all behaviors, positive behaviors, and toxic behaviors as well. And so, I think that comes out really effectively in the book, as you're kind of arguing that this is somewhat more than just the idea of like what we would traditionally call toxic behaviors. Now, I want to get that's something I actually want to get into. I think a lot of us, when we hear the term toxic behaviors, when it comes into the workforce, we think of something as kind of extreme, like this human has made my life hell, right? But I get the sense that you're looking at toxicity in kind of a broader sense, in that there's like subtle toxins that are damaging our work environment in the same way that there are subtle toxins that are out in the regular environment, damaging us in certain ways. And you call out that in behaviors that I think some people wouldn't necessarily even consider toxic, like, for example, a leader that is focusing relentlessly on the bottom line. I think a lot of people would listen to that and go, well, of course leaders should focus relentlessly on the bottom line. So talk about that archetype in particular, and why that can be an example of actually a toxic behavior inside a workplace.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the bottom liner, that's the archetype we're talking about here. The
Mhm.
the problem with the bottom liner is, it's not that they focus on the bottom line, it's that they focus on the bottom line above everything else, including all their employees.
Mhm.
Right? The argument I'm making it is that employees are a very important part of the bottom line. Right? If I can either have employees that just check the box every day, clock out at 5 o'clock and just do their job and leave, or I can have employees who are so connected with the vision of the company, so feel so valued by the company that they're literally trying to solve problems for the company in the shower. Right? which
Mhm.
which type of employee do you think is actually going to achieve more for the company and improve the bottom line? Right?
Yeah.
So the problem isn't that they're focused on the bottom line, it's that they literally look at people and see dollar signs everywhere, instead of seeing people and realizing that the people are a step to a higher bottom line. The one more thing I would make, the point I would make about the bottom liner is, if I work for a bottom liner, you cannot help but think, oh, okay, I get it. The bottom line's more important than me. So rather
Mm-hmm.
than me give you everything, because you don't care about anything but the bottom line. So why should I give you my all either? Right. And it ends up that there's a lot of data now, and I talk about it in the book. There's some studies that have been done that show that even employees who also have a bottom line mentality uh, withhold some of their productivity when they work for bottom line leaders.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that research fascinating. Just want to double down on that. You're basically saying that you've got leaders that are relentlessly focused on the bottom line. They're leading people that are relentlessly focused on the bottom line. And even then, they are achieving some suboptimal results. It's just
Correct.
fascinating stuff. The another archetype that you call out is the data obsessed, I guess you could call it.
The data
But
freak. Yeah.
the data freaks, the people that take this idea of being a data driven leader and take that to an extreme. Now, again, I think a lot of us, particularly if we've read Measure What Matters, and we've become like super obsessed with OKRs and all this kind of stuff, we might find that surprising. So what's wrong with with a healthy obsession with data?
Well, again, it's the same kind of problem with the bottom line, the bottom
Mm-hmm.
liner. The bottom liner is focused on just one piece of data, which is the bottom line. Data
Yeah.
freaks are just as obsessed. It's just that they're obsessed about everything having to be data,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, presumably you're a leader of people. You
Mm-hmm.
sell to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so your customers are people. Your peers are people. So if you have a lot of people around you, then you are in what I try to make the argument in the book. You're in the Cynefin model's complex quadrant, which is that you can't sit and strategize every possible move because things are only going to make sense in hindsight. And so when you're dealing with all this complexity of people, um, it's very difficult to data your way through that problem. Data is a very hindsighty kind of thing. Now, I'm not suggesting that data isn't valuable, nor am I saying you should never take any data. It's just that I've been in companies that are completely paralyzed by the fact that they don't have the data before they even take one step off the starting line. Um, I won't name any examples, but there are companies that want like 7-page, you know, full on studies before they'll do the most basic experimenting about their market. I've listened to some fantastic leaders who say, I could finish 5 experiments before this one company gets their foot off the starting line. Now, which companies do you think are going to innovate faster? The ones that can do small, short experiments, yes, capturing data from the end of those experiments to see what worked and what didn't, or someone who's trying to get all that information before they ever start, right? So that's the problem with data. The data freak is that they can create a trust problem with their teams. You've got a team that's saying, we need help here. We're overwhelmed. All of us are working nights and weekends. These are all human things they're bringing to their leader, and the leader's response is, "Show me the data." What do you think
Yeah.
that does to those teams? They're like, we're in trouble. We're working nights and weekends, and now you're giving us more work. We got to make a book report for you and a PowerPoint presentation to show you how much we're working over. It's just, you don't feel trusted, and if you don't feel trusted, then you're not going to trust upward.
Yeah, there's a couple of points that I'd love to kind of like dive in a little deeper with you on that. And I think the first piece is really around this whole idea of measure what matters, or the Drucker quote that was never made, which is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So I think that it's really important that people think about that, right? A lot of the work that we're doing here is in the field of intangibles, as it were, and this whole idea of everything needs to be reduced to a largely retroactive data point. Once you really start to think about it, doesn't even pass the sniff test, right? Are you literally saying that if it's not possible to measure this effectively today, that it doesn't matter, right? At what point is human sentiment, for example, which is notoriously difficult to measure effectively in the moment, right? At what point does that cease to become effective just because it's difficult to measure? I think that's an important point. The second, though, which I really would like you to talk about just a little bit more, is you brought up the Knuffen framework, and I feel anyway, and I'm curious to get your viewpoint on this, that the Knuffen framework and the challenges that we face around leadership are very intricately connected, in the sense that I think a lot of leaders want to lead a company that is predictable and obvious versus what it actually is, which is complicated and messy. Because predictable and obvious is easy to understand, right? Predictable and obvious it's easy for you to figure out what you're supposed to do as a leader if you're pretending that you're managing a predictable and obvious company. So do you agree with that statement, that there's sort of like this group of leaders, many of whom have been trained formally in visions of leadership and formal models as to what companies look like, whereby they're almost like, maybe it's subconsciously, but they're passive, they're resisting the idea that their company is complicated and messy and difficult to measure and difficult to lead in and difficult to even control. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do want to make one correction though. When you use the word complicated, you're making the same mistake
complex,
that others do. Yes,
yeah, complex,
right. And I make the argument in the book that this is a word that is often interchanged, but that's the beauty of the Knuffen model. So the predictable side of the model is complicated and predictable or basic. And I would say that where the biggest problem leaders are having right now is they're treating complex problems their teams are facing, and the fact that teams consist of human beings and customers consist of human beings, which make it complex. And they're trying to treat this as if it's an industrial revolution, era problem where we just need more people on the sewing machines and that's how we'll solve the problem. I've been on teams where the leader thought the greatest thing they could do is just feed pizza to the developers all day and lock them in a room and have them write 1,000 stories of every possible thing that could go wrong, right? Rather than just get out there and start, because it's complex. And I even made the point after they had spent days doing this, it didn't take more than a week for all that work to mean nothing, because right when they started their work, they realized, oh, this changed all these assumptions. This changed everything we had decided. And now we're going to be scrapping half this wall.
Mm. So, Sean, you list, as we've touched on a few more already, you list 10 different toxic leader archetypes. And I got the impression reading through all of them that probably all of us that are in leadership have little bits of ourselves in at least some of them, even if we strive not to. So I thought about this in my case. So I think I've got a little bit of a chess master and a little bit of an invertebrate in me, and those sound contradictory, but I can see those sort of elements in me. So I'm curious, have you thought about the sort of traits that maybe linger in you a little bit and how you strive to work on those?
Yeah, I think that like you, I feel like a little bit of a chess master sometimes. And I think that one of the reasons, the place I can slip very quickly is into the micromanager position if I don't trust the person who's working for me. So, for example, if I have a certain quality level or I have a certain thing I'm expecting and they continually come up short on that, I'm more likely to go into micromanager mode. I will say that even though the behaviors would probably fit with the micromanager archetype, I do try to do it from a place of instruction and teaching and hopeful that I can get to a place where I'm disengaging. I do think some micromanaging might be required every once in a while, just as some chess mastering might be required every once in a while, right? The art of it is,
why don't you briefly define the chess masterpiece? I think people probably understand micromanagement fairly well, but why don't you define the chess masterpiece?
Okay. The chess master is somebody who who really falls into the spot of thinking that leadership is a privilege and not a
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. They think they were rewarded by for their whatever brains, whatever it is, their quick
Mm-hmm.
decisions, their vision, whatever they think they got them where they are, and that reward makes them. I mean, I'm just gonna be blunt. It makes them feel better, like
Yeah.
higher than those who work for them, and so because of that, they feel like they're the ones to solve the problem, not the one to. They're a lot in the problem space and not in the question space, which is what when
Mm-hmm.
I'm coaching someone who's a chess master, I usually ask them to put themselves in the question space more than the answer space, which is a very uncomfortable place for them to be. It's a little bit of an art to both know the answer to something or know an answer and also
Mm-hmm.
empower your team to come up with an answer. Um, and so, but chess masters tend to not do that. They disappear and then they pop out of their cave, as I like to say, and just hand off all the instructions of how the teams are going to be. Here's a new policy for the team. We're going to break the team up and we're going to put you over here and you over here, as if they're just moving chess pieces around on a board and not necessarily actually working with the team to solve problems.
Yeah. And that part of the book is actually something I'd recommend people do spend a little bit of time working through, and I suggest even work through it with that mindset, because I do think that we all have like these behaviors that will sneak into, particularly when stress levels are high. So in my case, for example, the reason that I identify quite a bit with the chess masterpiece is that sometimes, particularly when things are, tight in terms of time or a budget or something like that, yes, I'll involve the team, but basically I'm involving the team in telling them what I think the solution would be, and then just having them
Mm-hmm.
act upon it,
Yeah.
versus actually bringing them in to actually do the solutioning piece of this. And so it's really fascinating when you work with leaders a period of time. There's like what they do when stress levels are low and they're thinking about this, and then there's the
Yep.
behaviors they fall back into when stress levels are high, which of course is actually when you need the contributions of your team the most. But it can be quite difficult for us to do that kind of stuff as a leader. Um,
Yes, I totally
which sort of
agree.
brings me to which sort of brings me to your world, actually, of because you obviously spend a lot of time now coaching and training organizations and helping them both from an organizational design perspective and then also the individuals in the organization. So if leaders have got this like disproportionate ability to poison a culture and destroy a company, you think that like giving them real actionable developmental opportunities would be like a huge priority inside companies. After all, I mean, the the fate of the company depends upon having leaders that are not like Barbara. So that should be the case, but yet many companies really only start to work with a leader when they know that they're failing. So why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, most companies don't even pay attention to when their leaders are failing, at least not in the way that we're thinking. Is one of the
Mm-hmm.
problems with toxic leadership is that some of our worst leaders look like highly successful leaders on
Yeah,
paper,
get into that. I love
right?
that. So let's talk about it in the context of like a publicly traded company, for example. I think it's a great. You have great examples of that.
Sure. So, I mean, if I look at a leader as somebody who just delivers what I give them to do. So, in other words, we have this new initiative that the executive team has decided they want to work on. I'm going to empower my leaders, the ones who work for me, to actually make that come to life. Right? If that's the goal, and I mean, it isn't just a goal. Let's be honest, Paul. These people are
Mm-hmm.
bonused on it. They
Mm-hmm.
get there's a financial reward for it. They're probably envisioning their stock price going up when this is done. So there's all kinds of in financial and other kinds of rewards, even political rewards, that are associated with you just simply getting this thing across the finish line. So let's just say that's the environment these leaders are working in. Now, there are two ways that leader can make that happen. They can either make it happen by just commanding everybody to make it happen. I don't care what you got to do, get this done. I don't care if you have to work weekends, evenings, whatever, get it done. That's one way. The other way is to have highly motivated employees who who will want to do it on their own time, even if they have to. They'll do whatever they got to do to get it done because they're so enmeshed in winning for the company that they want this. The problem is that from the senior executive lead level, it looks the same.
Mm.
right? Did you get it across the finish line or not? You got it across the finish line? Great. I'm done. Cool. Here's your bonus. Here's your reward. But what they're not doing is following up afterwards to find out, hey, after you got this across the finish line, did 3/4 of your talent want to leave the company? Because if is that truly a win? If a third of the people on your company want to leave after accomplishing this because they were commanded to do it in a way that was just a terrible work environment from the top, it looks the same. That's the point.
And this, I think, is potentially part of the challenge. Like, if I can, let me play devil's advocate a bit here, and in the book, it's fairly clear that you're not a fan of Jeff Bezos.
No.
And I think a lot of people would look at that and go, well, hold on here. We're talking about one of the most consistently successful companies of the past couple of decades, right? Maybe a company that, if I'm as they say, like if I'd bought $100 of stock in Amazon way back when, I'd be a very rich human being right now. So how can we logically argue that Jeff Bezos is not a good leader when the company has been not just been successful quarter over quarter, but has a track record of success that now dates back a couple of decades?
Well, first of all, let's not forget the fact that Amazon has a turnover rate that is, especially in their more blue collar side of the business, which is a significant side, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that is unprecedented. I mean, there are senior executives of the company that have privately expressed concern that they're running out of human beings in America
Yep.
to hire that haven't already been through the company.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would argue that there's more than one way to measure success, right? We certainly
Mm-hmm.
want the company to make money, and what I want to caution everybody though is to think of success as what the stock market is doing with the company, because the stock market has a very disconnected view of what's actually happening, right? I like to say that the people who are on the stock, who are shareholders, are if they were on a cruise ship, they're trying to steer the ship from a portal down in the third level below above sea level. They're not up at the captain's bridge looking at everything going on. They have a narrow set of metrics and measurements they're using to determine the health of the company, and employee engagement is rarely one of them. So,
Yeah.
or turnover is not one of them. And so the from a purely financial perspective, yes, I would argue that Amazon is successful for now. However, I would argue also that is, we've also reached a point where Amazon is almost untouchable from how I could give you a more recent example, which would be Elon Musk and Tesla,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who is going through laying off 14,000 people, article after article. You can just go Google it right now and you'll find a ton of articles about how everyone at the company who's there still, who hasn't been laid off, is feeling like corporate Hunger Games right now.
Yeah.
They feel like they don't know how to do their jobs. They are all scared for their jobs. I've been in environments like this where layoffs take years to do, and then you have innovation not happening. I don't even know if the person I'm supposed to meet with is even going to be here next week, or if I'm even going to be here next week. And I don't. I can't, no matter how the stock is performing, I can't imagine that isn't going to lend itself to good quality output from employees and innovative solutions, right? Now,
Yeah.
if your company's already developed all those and you don't need any more of them, I guess then go ahead and create this environment at your company. But I would assume that someone's going to eat your lunch. And that is exactly what is happening right now to Tesla, because they're not innovative. I mean, look at the models of Teslas that are on the road. They're the same models we've had for, since the beginning, pretty much. They're not really innovating much.
Yeah. And I think this is really important because there's a danger of us learning the wrong lessons, right? We have a history of taking leaders. You can go back in the past. You can think of Jack Welch, who you mentioned quite a few times in the book right now. We take leaders who have been successful at a company for a period of, let's say, 10 years or 15 years or something like that. We ignore the potential structural advantages that company has. In other words, advantages that company would have no matter who led that company, right? And we attribute the success of the company to typically the 50-year-old plus white male who conforms to a specific style of leadership that we think is a really good thing. And then it's only decades afterwards when we look back, Jack Welch being a primary example, and go, well, that was kind of dumb, right? And so there are, and we may be in that position right now. It's impossible for us to answer whether Amazon is where it is because Jeff Bezos is a great leader, or whether it is where it is because of structural advantages that Amazon has, combined with elements of luck and various other things. And I love your Tesla example because Tesla shows what can change inside a company when the company, which is as it was, has no real meaningful competition in its space and a movement behind it. And then what happens when it does have meaningful competition in its space and the movement behind it kind of dissolves somewhat. And all of a sudden, the challenges that you're talking about become oversized problems. And so Tesla is a great example. I'm sure you'll have it more of it in your in the next version, because it's such a fascinating thing to see in terms of what's happening to the organization right now.
Yeah, I'm working on a YouTube video for the Tesla example here. And I mean, I'm sure I'm going to, upset every Tesla fan in the world when I say this. I'm sure they idolize the guy. And I used to idolize the guy. I really did. I really thought that he was very visionary. And I still think to some degree he is. But you can't shake the human frailty of look at how he treats his critics. Look at how it's really hard to see that as balanced behavior. And that someone would, there's a story going around right now that the head of his supercharger network was someone that did not agree. She didn't want to do any more layoffs. And so he laid off her and her entire team. Everybody. It was like 500 people on the team. This is not the behavior of an emotionally stable leader. This is the behavior of someone who has, I don't know what to call it. I try to make up a word here, but I call like wealthitis, right? I mean, there's something about when you get really wealthy, you suddenly think you're an expert in every territory, in every subject matter.
Well, yeah, and it's a problem that happens with power as well. And of course, this is the other thing that unfortunately, we don't really have time to go into in any depth today, but maybe it's a topic for a follow-on discussion. But as these leaders are moving up inside their organizations, the other thing that is happening as well is they're hearing much less from people who disagree with them. They're hearing they're hearing all the time from people that are particularly the peacock archetype you're talking about, right? All the time where it's like flatter, I flatter this human, it will benefit me, right? So therefore, everybody you're hearing from, or many people you're hearing from, are people that are flattering you. And I call it the leadership awarditis. In other words, the further you go up, the more unsolicited awards that you start receiving, with everybody telling you how just amazingly awesome you are. And if you
talk to those leaders, they will tell you they want that negative feedback still. When I work with executives, they're telling me it's very hard for me to hear anything I'm doing wrong. I'm talking about leaders who have a growth mindset and want that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is, it's something to watch out for. If you're a leader and you're not getting that type of feedback, and you're not hearing from others the candid feedback, there is a problem. And there's a point that you make in the book. You kind of allude it to a dying star, right? And you make a point in the book that when people are telling you what's wrong, they're actually at their most engaged. And then
that's right.
If that's not acted upon, they'll shut down and they're out. And they're like the star that did the supernova bit and now is dead.
That's right. That's the mistake. That is a mistake that leaders make when they think that high engagement means high morale. It actually, they're not the same thing, right? Engagement just means I'm engaged with helping you make it better.
Yeah.
Not I'm happy. And I think people really screw that up. When you screw that up, you really do have this flame out, star flaming out scenario where someone, starts out kind of trepidatious. They're new to the company. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. They don't want to rock the boat, or whatever metaphor you want to use. So they're just sort of sitting there watching. And then they get comfortable enough to start really speaking up and telling you what might be wrong. And that is your most engaged employee right there. But what ends up happening is these are the leaders who are threatened by that will scarlet letter that person and either ignore them until they stop talking, which now they're disengaged, right?
Yeah.
And the worst thing you can have is a bunch of employees who have quit, but who are still staying there on your payroll. Right? That's the disengaged piece. And I mean, look, one of the things I'm trying to make the point about in the book over and over again is, how can you not see, even if you're bottom line obsessed, even if you're data obsessed, how can you not see those as data points you want to turn around?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Sean, I'll bring us home here. I'm getting really struck by, both in the book and in this conversation, that this is obviously something of a mission for you, working with individuals and teams and organizations to, let's call it, eliminate toxins. But, it's a challenge, right? Given the nature of our society, the way our companies are built, the way in which we measure the success of leaders inside organizations, it's an uphill battle. So do you think it really is possible to make a difference? And I'm preluding, if you like, how you finish the book, which I think would be a great way to finish the pod.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, this is not, I just want to say this way. When I hear that people say, oh, the culture here is, I don't know how many companies where I've heard say, oh, that's just the, Cisco culture. That's just the Adobe culture. That's just the Nike culture, whatever. The thing is, the buildings themselves do not have a culture, right? The logo on the side does not have a culture. The culture shows up when all the people show up every day. Mm-hmm. So if you want a different culture to show up, you either have to have different people show up, or you have to have people show up differently. We contribute to a culture individually, one by one. So you're right. It's an uphill battle, which is one of the reasons why I start at the top of the hill as much as I can, because I want it to be a downhill thing, not an uphill thing. I'm not going to get the masses to convince their CEO to have a different mindset about leadership, right? I mean, that leader will probably fail miserably and then blame everybody but themselves all the way to their retirement anyway. So the leader who's already aware of the fact that they have an impact on the culture, those are the leaders who I want to get to. And I feel like, and I also want to make the point, and I'll make it again, that we don't wake up thinking we're trying to destroy our teams every day. These are every person out here who's listening to this podcast, who is a leader, is not, and probably doesn't know that what they're doing is toxic, doesn't want to be toxic. And if they found out they would want to change it. Most of them. I'm not saying there aren't some villains in the leader space, but most leaders are not, okay, that way. And so I want everyone to think of this as even though the book has sort of a cynical tone to it, I want everyone to feel optimistic about their own ability to change who they are. I've heard for some very good leaders who have read my book who have told me, wow, I've spotted myself like you did, Paul. I've spotted myself in this archetype here. And sometimes it genuinely surprises me, because I know these people as leaders and would have never known that about themselves. But it speaks to their growth mindset that they are looking for the negative to find the thing that they can change. And I really feel like that's one of the, so when I finish the book, I talk about the starfish story, which is that a little girl is a big storm has come and washed thousands of starfish up onto the beach. And this little girl is on the beach and she's throwing the starfish back into the ocean one by one. And this man comes up to her and says, what are you doing, little girl? You're never going to save all these starfish. There are thousands of them. And she looks down at one and she picks it up and she throws it back in the ocean, and she looks back at the man and says, I made a difference for that one. And he stops and thinks, and he starts to help her. And soon all the people that were mocking her join in. And before you know it, all the starfish are saved. And that story is one that just keeps me going every day. I'm not trying to get into a company and change the whole culture. I'm trying to get into a company and change individual leaders, because I am positive that if I do that, the culture will change.
Great way to end it. Thank you so much, Sean. Once again, the book is One Drop of Poison. A great read and really engaging read as well. You'll almost certainly learn some stuff from it. So go ahead and get that. And thank you again, Sean, for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Paul.